Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back. Come in, sit down. I'm very glad you're here tonight. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing would have cost you everything? Where the rules, the orders, the expectations of everyone around you pointed clearly in one direction, and something deep inside you pointed somewhere else entirely? The man I want to tell you about tonight faced that question at 30,000 feet in a fighter plane with his finger near the trigger. And what he chose took 50 years to come to light. Let me take you to December 20th, 1943. The skies over Bremen, Germany. A fleet of American B-17 bombers had been sent to strike the city, and the mission was brutal. German fighters and anti-aircraft fire tore through the formation. One bomber in particular, a B-17 named Ye Old Pub, piloted by a 21-year-old lieutenant from West Virginia, named Charlie Brown, took catastrophic damage. The nose of the aircraft was almost completely gone. One engine was dead, a second was failing. The tail gunner had been killed. Several of the crew were wounded. The oxygen system was barely working. The plane was falling behind the formation, slow and broken and alone in hostile airspace. Charlie Brown was doing everything he could just to keep the aircraft in the air. He knew that any German fighter that spotted him could end it in seconds. A crippled bomber alone over Germany in 1943 was not a plane that expected to make it home. Down below, at a German airfield near Bremen, a Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stiegler had just landed, rearmed, and refueled. He was 30 years old, one of the most accomplished fighter pilots in the German Air Force, with 22 confirmed kills. One more would earn him the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. He climbed back into his Messerschmitt and went up after the straggler, and then he pulled alongside it. My friends, I want you to understand what Franz Stiegler saw when he came up beside that aircraft. He saw a plane that was barely a plane anymore. He saw the shattered nose. He saw the dead gunner. Through the gaps torn in the fuselage, he could see directly into the interior, could see the wounded men slumped at their stations, some of them too hurt to even lift a weapon. He could see the faces of the crew. He had every reason to fire, every military reason, every professional reason. It would have been his 23rd kill, the medal he had earned, the approval of everyone he served with. By the rules of war, it would have been entirely legitimate. He did not fire. Later, he explained why. Early in the war, a commanding officer had told him something he never forgot, that you fight with honor or you become a murderer. That there is a difference between killing a soldier who can fight back and finishing off a man who is already beaten. Stiegler looked through that shattered nose, saw boys trying to get home, and could not make himself be the one to end them. But sparing them was not enough to save them. The crippled bomber still had to cross miles of German airspace, past anti-aircraft batteries on the ground that would fire the moment they saw it. So Franz Stiegler did something that, had it been reported to his commanders, could have had him executed for treason. He stayed. He tucked his fighter in close beside the broken American bomber, close enough that the gun crews on the ground would see the German markings on his wings and hold their fire, unwilling to risk hitting one of their own. Charlie Brown, in the cockpit, had no idea what was happening. He suspected a trick. He kept flying west, toward England, toward home, and the German pilot flew beside him the whole way, shielding him until they reached the open water of the North Sea. There, Stiegler looked across the gap between the two aircraft. He caught Charlie Brown's eye, and he saluted. Then he peeled away and flew back to Germany, carrying a secret that could have cost him his life. Neither man spoke of it for a long time. Charlie Brown reported it in his debriefing and was told to forget it. A German sparing an American crew did not fit the story the war was telling. Franz Stiegler stayed silent for reasons of his own. He had broken faith with his own Air Force. And there are things a man does not say out loud. After the war, he emigrated to Canada and built a quiet life. But the memory of that bomber never left him. 46 years passed. In 1989, Charlie Brown, by then retired from the Air Force, decided he had to find the man who had spared him. He placed an appeal in a newsletter for German fighter pilot veterans, describing what had happened over Bremen on December 20th, 1943. A few months later, a letter arrived. It began, "Dear Charlie, I was the one." When they finally spoke by telephone and then met face to face, something happened that I find hard to describe without feeling it in my chest. These two men, one American, one German, who had met for a few minutes in the freezing sky, nearly 50 years before, became friends. Not polite acquaintances exchanging a card once a year. Deep, genuine, lasting friends. They traveled to see each other. They spoke often. They told their story to anyone who would listen. Charlie Brown said of the man who had once had him in his sights, "He was the best of our enemies." Franz Stiegler died in March 2008. Charlie Brown died just months later, in November of the same year. They had been close friends for nearly 2 decades, these two old men, who were supposed to have killed each other over Germany in the winter of 1943. My dear friends, I think of Franz Stiegler whenever I feel the pull to do what is easy instead of what is right, when the path of least resistance is also the path of least conscience. He had a medal in front of him and a broken plane full of wounded boys in his sights. Everyone he served would have called it a victory. He looked through that shattered glass, saw human beings, and chose to fly beside them instead. And half a century later, one of those boys found him and called him friend. Thank you so much for spending this evening with me, my dear friends. Until next time, take care of each other. Good night.